Tired of the same old at business events? Well, this is not the same as last year. The podcast where we blow up the boring and lead the charge into the attendee-first era of business events. I'm Clare Forestier, a business event MC obsessed with transforming audiences from passive observers into dynamic participants at events. Each week we'll challenge the conventions, share actionable tips, and hear from fellow event rebels who are mastering the engagement game. Imagine your attendees begging for more after your next event. That's the magic of prioritising their experience. Ready to ditch the dull and create corporate events your audiences will rave about? Then you've found your tribe. Join the movement. Welcome to Not the Same as Last Year. Hi, and welcome back to Not the Same as Last Year. I'm your host, Clare Forestier, a professional business event MC. And today we're going to be talking about the fundamental desire of human beings to be seen and heard, and the difference it makes to an attendee when an event gets this right for them, or indeed wrong. Now, I bang on a lot, as I'm sure you've learned by now, about this essentially touchy-feely side of events, how we need to answer our attendees' needs, give them what they want, make them feel valued. And I think now what you, my podcast attendees, would want is to hear from an expert in human behaviour, emotions and mental processes. So enter the event psychologist. Kelly McCormack is an event planner with a little bit of a difference because a decade deep into her career, organising conferences, dinners, receptions and award ceremonies in the higher education space, and indeed winning awards for this work, she has decided it's time to reunite her degree in psychology with her work in events, and she is sharing her research and findings with the events community. I heard her speak to a really standing room only audience of event planners at Confex earlier this year, and she really inspired me to talk about this subject. So of course I had to invite her on. I started by asking Kelly to explain more about this human need to be seen and heard.
The kind of value of being seen and heard relates to all areas of life. But as soon as you kind of mention it in conversation, people start to get this reaction into their body and their brain starts to go, well, what do I want? What do I feel? What do I need? And it's never been more prominent in like a post-pandemic world. So obviously we could talk for ages about a post-pandemic world in terms of events and how the design has changed and the kind of production of events has changed. But we've got to remember that during that pandemic, people themselves went through change. So obviously we all kind of reflected on what matters to us in life and what we really care about, and that obviously had a different change in terms of generation. So there was people who went through that time feeling very isolated, very alone, so now they want to get the most that they can out of life and events. There's people that slowed down and decided that they wanted to become more introverted. There's generations that kind of suffered with their education through that, so now they're kind of really wanted to, they can feel really motivated as to getting their needs met and wants met, but equally they might feel the opposite. They might feel still quite demotivated from that period of time. So in terms of events and kind of thinking about people and what they want and what they need, extra time should be given and extra kind of care and attention, and putting people's wants and needs at the forefront of the kind of thinking of the design of the events should really take kind of precedent and priority, and definitely like a discussion, because if you sit around a table with your team and say there's 5 of you, each person there is going to have a different one and a different need. So obviously your hundreds of thousands of attendees are all going to have their individual wants and needs as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. I didn't even expect you to say that, because obviously I bang on about the feeling heard and need and seen, but there's this whole other element. We're all more aware of that because of the pandemic. It's about, isn't it, being seen and heard and valued. It's all about feeling part of community, feeling part of some idea. So if we want to, and I'm talking all the time about attendee first ideas of events, how can we apply what you're telling us to have a more engaging event experience?
Benckendorff and Pierce are quite key researchers in event psychology, and they wrote big about psychology of events. And they really kind of break it down into kind of pre-event, during your event, and then post-event, and how dedication should be given to those kind of elements of it, and do that journey with your attendees, put yourself in their shoes, see what they would want. So kind of your pre-event, you're kind of looking to ensure that your attendee feels like very knowledgeable in terms of what's going to happen, what to expect, so there's no surprises, so they feel comfortable and safe. During their event, they have options, they have choice, they have space to express themselves, whether that's in a room of like thousands of people or whether that's in small kind of breakout rooms. And then post-event is very much kind of the retaining of information and the retaining of experience and what they really felt during that time, whether it was positive, negative, in between, in order for them to kind of vocalize with you what they would prefer moving forward. With that kind of event design, a lot of the time things get skewed to, if something didn't work, it was because of like the tech, or it was because of like the time or the logistics or whatever. And that's, obviously we need to look at those things and really pay attention to that kind of stuff. But just before a decision is made as to what the actual problem was, we do need to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what these people were feeling and thinking, because a lot of them aren't going to communicate with you. They had an experience that wasn't ideal. They're just going to kind of keep that to themselves, and that's really the last thing that we want. Event managers, people in general, like to go from a psychology aspect of it, we don't always like hearing critical or bad feedback, but actually we really need that in order to kind of give these people what they want. And the more happy and the more satisfied and the more that they feel like they express themselves, the more benefits you're going to get from that event.
Remind me of those researchers' names again quickly.
So
Benckendorff and obviously we'll put details in the show notes about that. That's kind of, and you were talking about afterwards, so it's almost like looking at it after you put everything in and questioning it almost from the beginning, saying, no, are we going to be having these in everything we do?
Yeah, so I think it's hard for me to come in and be like, no, scrap everything that you've done for years and start afresh. Like, it's just not realistic for event managers or event professionals or suppliers to kind of do that. So what would be more encouraging would just be to spend some time kind of reflecting, looking through your debriefs, kind of saying, well, what minor changes can we try and test and just see if they make a little bit of a difference. And the more small wins that you get, the more kind of argument you can have for making bigger changes. I think a really nice thing to kind of bear in mind that I love, and a nice piece of research was by a researcher called Philippe, and so they had a group of researchers that did this, was to do, that stays in my head, is that they said that escapism is like a common key motivation for attendance. So events kind of create the space that's different from your everyday place. So some people can feel really like excited if they say, oh, what are you up to? Or like, oh, I'm going to an event, or I'm going to a work event, or I'm going to a conference. Some people can find that really empowering because they can get away from their desk for the day. They can get away from what's going on in their head for the day and just focus on some content. Obviously, other attendees might be forced to be there. So obviously that escapism isn't gonna be the key motivation for them being there. They might be motivated by their bosses telling them to be there or whatever. But equally, that you can change their perspective when they're there, if they're there because they have to be there, but then the content is really engaging and really hitting their needs and wants, and obviously you can change that perspective around. So yeah, it's kind of tiny changes, and testing is the easiest way to kind of approach event psychology.
If people don't feel included at an event, they don't feel that seen or heard, what is the impact?
The danger is that if they go away from that event not feeling seen, not being heard, not getting their needs met, obviously that can come out in kind of recommendations of not to go to that event, not to go to that supplier, not to go to that production company because of the effect that they had. And if they say, oh, well, why? What did you think? If they're saying that they didn't feel a connection to it, then in this 2024 world where we need connection, and connections are so vital, and social psychology and being with other people and kind of enjoying that social aspect of our lives, as soon as you hear that, it's very quite detrimental because it's just not going to be what you want.
Reputational damage.
Exactly. And this is why event psychology is so interesting to me, because cognitive psychology is obviously about retaining information, what your short-term memory likes, what your long-term memory likes. And there's people in the industry, myself, and everyone is individuals. You'll have events from a long time ago. I have events from 10 years ago that I went to and I still remember them. And it's because something connected with me. So I'll always talk about it or remember it or say, oh, this happened 10 years ago. Why don't we try that now? And even though we want to move forward as a kind of industry, things like from 10 years ago can still work. Like, so for example, I ran an event 10 years ago which had like a kind of selfie booth thing, and obviously it was just like, you know, you hold the card thing up. Now in 2024 we're still doing that, but it's like one of those 360 ones that goes round and round. But the idea came from something that happened a long time ago, and because that stayed in my long-term memory, you pull it through, but because that had the effect. So the danger is that if something stays in someone's long-term memory that they didn't like, it can be very hard for them to get rid of that memory if they've processed it based on feeling, because the feeling will come up, oh no, I didn't like that, I didn't like that. So the same with, like, say, for example, if you're the CEO or a client and you're like, this is my event proposal, this is the venue, like you've had really good conversation with the venue or the caterers or whatever, and they turn around and go, no, 5 years ago I had a very bad experience there, vetoed, like not doing it. So this is why it's so interesting in terms of like taking away the psychological aspect that stays with people based on the experience of an event.
But people don't use that term when they're responding. I mean, do we even ask them properly questions in the feedback form? Maybe that's another question in a minute. To even get the right knowledge back that we could actually change things for them. But also, what are the words, if you were an event planner or part of a team and you're looking at your feedback or your debrief or whatever, what are the words that, or the things that people might say that are indicating they didn't feel seen and heard? Because it's all very flowery here, but most people do not respond with, I didn't feel seen and heard for that event. And if they did, we'd all go, ooh, you know, snowflake. But no, it's that, what is the kind of feedback that people give?
Yeah, I think it's around this kind of
The wording.
If people are brave enough to say, I didn't feel like I could express myself and I really wanted to. So maybe the question is something around, did you feel like you had self-expression, or did you feel like you could express yourself or contribute to the discussion? It's all about this thing called co-creation. So that's where people are able to co-create their experience, which is a really great psychological term. So it's where they can come in and either make choices on their agenda, make choices on where they're going to go to their breakout sessions or whatever. There's this whole area of co-creation where they co-create their experience, which is great, and that's exactly what we need. The next level to that is that they had a chance to express themselves. So whether that was through questioning, whether that was through one-to-one conversations, whether that was through kind of giving video testimonies or whatever, there's loads of opportunity to do that. But if they don't get that opportunity, that can stay with them because they've got all of this emotion, all of these feelings, all of these thoughts they didn't have a chance to get out, and that can just stay. If it's not processed, again, that will go into long-term memory and just kind of stay hovering when we don't want it to.
And it just feels that I just didn't like that event. You don't even potentially know why.
And something else as well to consider is there was a study in 2014 which found that kind of 65% of people wanted experiences, so events, more than kind of possessions. And that same study found that millennials will account for around about 75% of the workforce in a decade. So this is in 2014. And they'll spend so much money kind of each month on attending events. So obviously we're talking maybe more live events than corporate events, but it's still something to consider that people really value experiences over possessions nowadays, particularly in a post-pandemic world. So obviously they're giving their time, their money, their energy to these. The expectation is high.
Yeah, and I think that word experience is potentially misleading in the sense that people think of experience as a kind of doing something amazing at the event, like sprinkling stardust everybody. That's not actually what it is. And I do feel there's still that, how do we add the wow factor in terms of something glitzy or an amazing speaker or whatever? And it's like, you can actually spend a lot less money and less stardust to give people an amazing experience. I mean, that's what I try and talk about in this podcast all the time. What is a specific thing that people could be doing, or some strategies that people could implement that would help deliver that sense of feeling and being heard?
The key thing that I would always start with is looking at the agenda and looking if there is opportunities for choice, self-expression, co-creation. So you look at that and you kind of go through that journey with your attendees and say, can they go off here for a breakout session? Do they have a choice of an agenda point here? Do they have time to charge their phone, take a minute, take a breather, get a coffee? Because if they don't, again, that's just like going to put them in this state of, ooh. So it's looking at that agenda and seeing what choice, where there is space for self-expression. And you might redesign your event, give space for self-expression, and no one will engage. That's okay. It's still having that space where people can express themselves. And obviously self-expression can be, and you might need a bit of nurturing where people feel a bit nervous or whatever to come through. Again, you can kind of counter that. And I love it when events do this, when they say, okay, the speaker will be here for another 5 to 10 minutes if you want to come and have a private conversation, because obviously some people are introverted, some people are a bit shyer, they want to self-express, but they don't want to do that in a room full of 100 people. So giving them the private space to do that is always a little win as well. So yeah, the main thing is to just kind of look at your agenda, see where you can kind of just give a bit more self-expression, a bit more space, a bit more breathing room.
I wanted to talk to you about a word that comes up a lot in events when people are giving advice to event planners, are going, build the FOMO, build the FOMO. But I have an issue with that, because do you want people to feel panicked and worried and anxious? Yes, I suppose you do when you want them to buy the ticket. And then if you want to make sure that they come, if it's, say, a low-cost event. So that concept of FOMO. But then I also worry about putting too much choice in an event and making people, I've missed that, I didn't do that. Because that's also not very good to somebody's well-being. And also you will leave going, I didn't feel heard or listened to. I felt really rushed the whole time.
Yeah, it's been horrible. Yeah, I'm massive for FOMO. Like, I get it. So I totally feel you. But it's interesting that the kind of term JOMO has come out as well, the joy of missing out, that's been coming out recently.
You don't want them to miss your event.
No, so now you're having to kind of adapt to those people that are like, no, I don't even want to come, but we want you to come. So yeah, it's really interesting because you don't want to pressure your attendees to attend. You want them there because you authentically want them there to enjoy. But of course, we're not in an ideal world where everyone is in that position. We're in a position of empowerment since the pandemic. So people are very vocal to say your prices are too high. I can't afford that cost of living or whatever. So the FOMO really comes in when you've got these, like you say, the kind of key speakers, the celebrities, the choice, the kind of all of the advertisements. So again, it's just hitting that kind of pause moment when you're looking at your marketing and kind of saying, what is the little things that we can kind of tailor to different audiences, maybe putting your kind of audiences into different categories and saying, very dedicated, high attachment, low attachment, or very kind of who's going to be an active attendee and really engaged, who's going to be quite passive and kind of just kind of going along for the ride. How would you tailor your marketing towards those people? And it's kind of interesting what you said about the choice and like kind of coming in and be like, oh, I've missed on that and missed on that. And a really good term that I really like to read about is called paradox of choice. So obviously I've spoken to you and I'm like, make sure your agenda fits everyone, make sure your agenda's loose, blah, blah, blah. But there is this phenomenon called paradox of choice where if people are faced with too many choices, they won't make one, which is incredible. Or they'll make one but regret and feel like they've missed out on the other choices that they didn't go for. So you kind of also have to cater to that where they can't have too much choice. So, I mean, that could be a simple thing. If you're going for breakout sessions rather than 4, you bring it down to 2. So they've literally just got one or the other. And maybe having that content kind of recorded so people that didn't attend that bit can obviously kind of grab that information as much as they want. There's a marketing rule, I can't remember the kind of details behind it, but I'm sure it's about it's 7 kind of chances before someone buys something. It's more a kind of consumer rule where you give them 7 opportunities to kind of buy it, and hopefully by the 7th one they would have bought it. So if you have that in mind, then you might make the decisions that rather than at the beginning when you launch your event, you want to tell them everything, all the good juicy stuff that you've got coming up, but maybe if you have the patience or the ability to kind of hold back and drip feed it and just have that confidence that at some point during those 7 tries or however many you do, is going to connect with someone. Because it's simple psychology as kind of with money psychology. Someone right at the beginning when they hear about it, like, oh, I can't afford that, if you get them the day after payday when their mindset's different, then you might get them then. So it's all about that kind of drip feeding. But I understand, as an event manager myself, it's like you want to give them all, you want to give them as much information as possible, and like we said pre-event, you want them to feel knowledgeable, you want them to feel that they know what's going on. But equally, if we can try to like tailor it to different, well, just bear in mind that the mindset of the different attendees that we're going out to, then maybe we can just get a little bit of a different outcome. But like I say, it's all trial and test.
It is a bit of testing, isn't it? I love what you said about too much choice. It's like if you go to if you have a menu at a restaurant that's got too many things on it, you spend the whole time, as soon as you're given the order, go, I should have had that. I should have had that. And you just need a small choice. Victoria Matey, who we both are very fond of and thinks amazing, another event psychologist, she talks about asking people for advice.
Yes, love that.
And so you can thank them and say, we think you're amazing for coming to the event, but also we are really desperate to make the event you want. It's not the desperate word. So if you ask for advice as opposed to feedback.
Yeah. And when do you ask for it? So obviously the tradition is that we all leave the event, we all leave site, and we'll have a breather, and then the next day we send everything out. But maybe if you can incorporate that on the day, whether it's halfway through, quarter way through, and at the end, where you've just got people on the spot, and obviously being put on the spot can be a bit nerve-wracking, but actually people don't have time to think through what they're going to say. They kind of just give you their feedback there and then. It can kind of bring out some little gold nuggets there. And at that point, you can really thank them. And if you're thanking them face to face, then obviously that means a lot more than it coming in the communication.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you could do one thing, what would be the one thing that you would suggest to event planners that they could immediately do to an event that would at least cover off some of that, helping your attendees feel seen and heard?
And kind of two-sided. For event planners, just take a breath. And I know it's really hard to do because the jobs are very, very busy, but just take a breath and think about where in your agenda you can add some self-expression time for your attendees. Whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 15 minutes, whether it's an hour, whatever, but just see if there's any little positions where you can just kind of take something out or add just a bit of reflection time for your attendees so they can really like self-express themselves. And we're not talking about, oh, is anyone got any Q&As and here's a Q and here's a question, here's what we think. Just real time where you can kind of go to your, maybe even ask your audience and just be like, how are you feeling? Is it brought up any fears that you want that you feel free to share? And obviously people don't need to share, but you might just get some really, really juicy stuff out of that.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that's, as an MC, exactly what I'm always pushing for, is that asking the audience a question, even sometimes just a rhetorical one that is something they think about in their heads, can be really useful.
Love that, yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How much different just doing a little bit of reflection and increasing the opportunities for that and some co-creation moments can have on the mindset of your attendees. A massive thanks to Kelly for speaking to me today on the podcast. All Kelly's details are in the show notes, including the links to the research that she mentioned. Now, next time on Not the Same as Last Year, we're going to be talking about another way to really give your attendees a chance to feel part of a community, and in a way that is going to help their careers and businesses grow. And that, of course, is networking, but not the way we've always done it. So join me for the next episode of Not the Same as Last Year, the networking makeover, how structured sessions put your attendees first. And there you have it. I hope you're inspired to revolutionize the attendee experience at your next event. Ready to dive deeper? Download your free guide, 5 Ways to Elevate Your Attendee Experience Without Breaking the Bank. The link is in the show notes. Subscribe to Not the Same as Last Year podcast, connect with me, Clare Forestier, on LinkedIn, or visit my YouTube channel for even more tips and insights to make your events a hit with your attendees. Don't forget to leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback is going to fuel my mission. Stay tuned next week for another episode packed with inspiring ideas and practical strategies to put your attendee first.